and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Tonya, and today I'm going to be sharing all of the books that I read during the month of March. There were 3 audiobooks and 6 physical or ebooks that I read during the month of March, so not too shabby of a reading month, if I do say so myself. So let's start with the audiobooks. These are going to be a mix of romantasy and fantasy for all the books, not just the audiobooks. But I thought we'd go through the audiobooks first, and then we'll dive into the ebooks and the physical books that I read this month. So the first 2 books I want to talk about are part of the same series. It's the Legends of Thesmar series by Helen Schurer, and I finished the Fates and Furies, which is book 4, and Shadow and Storms, which is book 5, and finishes up the series. Now, I've been making my way through this series for a long time at this point. It hit a point in the 3rd book. So editing me here, I don't know at what point I decided there was 5 books in this series. There's 4, and the 2 that I'm talking about today, the Fates and the Furies and the Shadow and Storms, that's books 3 and 4, and the book that had the lag was book 2. So I hope that clears things up. I don't know what I was thinking. There's 4 books in the series, so there you go. Where just there, the back and forth of the I love you, I hate you in the series, I needed a little break from that, so I didn't listen to it for a while. And then in March, I went ahead and picked it back up, and I'm really glad I did. I really enjoyed the first 2 books in the series. The 3rd book was kind of the I love you, I hate you book. And then the 4th and 5th book, as they progressed, you kind of got back to, you know, the romance evolving more and their relationship growing and not being so much of that back and forth that, I don't know, just after a point, that when it gets to be that back and forth, I just find it somewhat irritating, quite honestly. And, you know, it's just not something that's very entertaining in my eyes. But I will say, overall, the world was great. She does a lot of great world building throughout the 5 books. And the plot is really good, too. It was just something about that 3rd book in the series that the back and forth got to be a little bit too much for me. But as I said, that calmed down a lot in the 4th book, and then the 5th book was probably, besides the 1st book, the 5th book was my favorite. If you're not familiar with the Legend of Thesmar series, we're following Thea in her quest to become a war sword, which is a high-ranking fighter in the realms that this story takes place in. Females are no longer allowed to be fighters, so, you know, it's quite a big undertaking for her to think she's ever going to get the chance to be a war sword. But there's some twists and turns that happen along the way as she kind of gets to this quest for becoming a war sword. She ends up being taken as an apprentice by a war sword named Wilder. That is the romantic love interest in this series of book. So, you know, that's kind of why I think they had that back and forth a little bit. He was forced to take her on as an apprentice. It wasn't really anything he ever wanted. So their relationship didn't necessarily get off on the best note. But along with that, in her quest to become a war sword, the realms that they live in are being overtaken by dark forces who have shadow magic. And it's something that's sweeping across all the realms. It's very widespread. There is a war that ends up happening. I don't want to give too much away that way if you do listen to the books, but there's a whole lot that goes on. The description of the world is great. The description of the magic used in the book is really good too, as well as the battle descriptions. So would highly recommend. For me, I would say the series overall would be a 4-star series. It's really good. I wouldn't say it's fantastic, and there was that lull in the 3rd book, but overall, great series. Would recommend listening to or reading, whichever, you know, floats your boat on that point. But the audiobooks are really good. The 2 narrators, there's Thea has a viewpoint as well as Wilder has a narrator. And you get a good amount of narration from both of them. And like I said, they're really good. They're consistent across the 5 series. You have the same narrators. So would highly recommend the audiobooks, but I've heard people who have read the physical books really enjoyed those as well. Then the third book I listened to this month was Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune, and this is the sequel to House on the Cerulean Sea. And I will say I like the second book way better than the first book. I gave it 4.25 stars. It was really good. The first book took quite a while for me to actually get into, but by the end of it, I was very invested in the different kids' stories who were at the orphanage, as well as Linus and Arthur, but it did take a long time for me to get to a point where I was really invested in the characters in the first book. And the second book, since I was already invested in all the different characters that were in it, I didn't have that same problem. Now, the story itself unfolds slowly. I don't feel like you get to what the meat of the story is and what the actual plot line is until probably halfway or more through the book. In this particular book, based on events that happened in his earlier life, it starts off with Arthur going to testify in front of a government committee based on his experience living in an orphanage that was under the care of the Department of Magical Youth. Let's just say it wasn't a pleasant experience for him, and that is why he is now testifying in front of this group. We find out that there, along the way, you'll see some different themes come up in this book. So the book does showcase inclusiveness. The two main characters and the main love interest in the story are Arthur and Linus, and they are a male couple. And as you go through the book, you find that they are working to adopt the children from the orphanage who are under their care. And that's kind of the main plot line of the book. It's not really that testimony that takes place. That kind of just sets off the events. But Arthur and Linus's quest to adopt their children is really the main themes of the book. There are some themes that bring up bigotry and racism and just hatred towards the magical community in this book. There is a little bit of a mention of that towards the LGBTQ community as well. I don't think it's presented in a way that should keep you from reading the books if that's something that's going to be upsetting to you. And it's of course should be upsetting to everyone, but I mean upsetting in a way that's going to be too painful for you to read. I don't think it's presented in that way, but I think it really brings some different themes to light that I think in the current environment that our world is in, it's really important that we revisit some of these topics about how we look at and treat others. So I thought this was a very great book to listen to. The narrator in it is the same one from the first book, and they do a fabulous job, but love this book. Like I said, 4.25 star just because I thought it had a lot of great themes and important messages, but in the end, it just wasn't a 5-star read for me, even though I really appreciated all the points the book was making. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and move on to the physical and the ebooks that I read. We're gonna start off with Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett, and I love this series. It's a really cute, cozy fantasy series. And this is the second book in the trilogy. So this book picks back up with Emily and Wendell being back at Cambridge, where they're both professors. And we had learned in the first book that Wendell is actually a high fae king in exile. He was put into exile by his mother, and he's been searching for a backdoor way to get into the fairy realm so that he can reclaim his throne. And Emily has promised to help him with this. Wendell and Emily are in a romantic relationship. He has asked her to marry him, but she has not given her answer as of yet. But in the meantime, she is working to help him find this back door to get back into his Fae homeland. Now, his mother, who is an evil queen, ends up sending assassins to Cambridge to try to kill Wendell. So after the assassination attempt, they end up leaving Cambridge to follow a lead on one of these back doors into the fairy realm. Now, I thought that this particular book was going to take place a lot more at Cambridge, and that was going to be where they were at for most of the book, but that was not the case at all. They weren't at Cambridge for very long at all before they traveled off to search for this back door into the fairy realm. In this book, we are also introduced to Emily's niece, who has been doing understudy or undergraduate work for her. She is now a student at Cambridge, and she's following in Emily's footsteps as far as studying the Fae. And she goes along with them, as well as an old crotchety professor who feels like he needs to keep an eye on Wendell now in their search for this back door into Wendell's realm. Now, I will say these books, I mean, the plot is very cute. I think these books would still make an excellent TV series, which I think I've mentioned before. But the plot, because it's cozy fantasy, it's good, but it's not this big, detailed world. There's a couple areas in this book where I wanted a little bit more. So without giving too much away, there was an escape that happened from somewhere in the fairy realm, and I felt like that was like completely glossed over in the book, which could have really made like the escape itself and the journey back to the small village they're staying in could have been a really great addition to the storyline. But basically, like, you know, this big escape happened and that was completely kind of glossed over, I felt like, in the book. So I feel like that was an opportunity that was lost. I know cozy fantasy doesn't always have those in-depth storylines, but for me that was a little bit lacking in this book. I still was at 4 stars. But for me, there's just some points that could have had more details. I am an epic fantasy girl through and through, so it kind of killed my soul that the author skipped over that escape and didn't give us all the details about it. So that was that was a little bit of a downer for me, but overall really enjoyed the book, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the series finishes out in the 3rd book, which is why can't I think of it right now? I think it's a compendium of lost tales, which I have on my April TBR. But yeah, overall, if you haven't tried this series yet, give it a go. I think you'll really enjoy it. And then the next book I read was The House of Earth and Blood, which is the first book in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. And for this book, I can tell you, when I started reading it, I hated it. I didn't like it at all. I thought I wasn't going to finish it. For whatever reason, and I don't know how I didn't know this, but I didn't realize it was an urban fantasy. I tend to enjoy the more traditional medieval type fantasy, Renaissance fantasy setting. I'm just not a big fan of the mix of, you know, magic and guns and cell phones and all that. So I did not like the book at all. So I almost didn't finish it, but you know, I was like, I started reading it. A lot of people really like this book. Just give it a chance. And then as the book went on, I actually ended up really enjoying it. It was a 4-star read for me. There's a couple plot points that I feel like could have been outlined a little better. So Bryce, who is our female main character in this, she has a really strong personality. She is half fae and half human. And as with many fantasy books, half-bloods are looked down upon, so she's basically had to put up with a lot of shit from people her whole life, and she's definitely developed a thick skin because of that. Now, in this kind of world that Sarah J. Maas has made, in Crescent City, there are shapeshifters, which are kind of like werewolves, but not. There's fae, angels are also a high power, and then there's some other classes or species that also live in Crescent City, but it's very race oriented. People, if you're fae, you stay with the faes. If you're a shifter, you're mostly hanging out with shifters. So it's very class or species oriented, and humans are kind of at the bottom of that food chain or class system. Bryce ends up experiencing a great loss at the beginning of the book, and it kind of changes her whole outlook on life. She goes from being kind of a tough-skinned party girl to someone that just has a lot of regret, a lot of sorrow, keeps to themselves, and is really just unwilling to love someone again or care for someone again because she just doesn't want to be hurt in that way ever again. and she works for she is an assistant to an antiquities dealer who does legitimate and, let's say, black market antiquities. And based on that experience, she ends up being told by the head archangel that she has to help some of his soldier angels or second in commands find this object. That being said, that brings Hunt into the picture, who is the male main character, and he is just a gorgeous fallen angel who ends up being her bodyguard. And you know what happens when you end up being someone's bodyguard. Obviously, you fall madly in love with the person you are guarding. But all that being said, Hunt and Bryce, they start having feelings for each other, but while these feelings are happening and they're searching for this object that's been stolen, that could really be devastating for the city and especially for all the humans that reside in the city. So don't want to give much more away than that, but definitely glad that I kept reading the book. I would recommend it even if you're not a urban fantasy fan. Definitely give it a try. Like I said, I am not an urban fantasy fan and almost gave up on the book completely, but I'm really happy I finished it. I'm looking forward to seeing how things kind of play out in the second book. I've heard, and I don't know, of course, if this is the case or not because I haven't read it yet, but I've heard the second book is really the best book out of the series, and that the third book is maybe not exactly people's favorites. So definitely want to continue the series at some point and to see if I continue liking it, even though it is an urban fantasy. So the third book I read was Queen of Serpents and Shadows by Alex Calder, and it is the last book in the Blood and Salt series. And this book, I'm not going to say a lot about it. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't great. It was okay. I felt out of the 4-book series, this was the weakest book. The dialogue was really weak. It was very disjointed and it didn't really seem to flow from character to character. And the plot line itself, I didn't think that was very good either. It's very loosely based on Greek mythology, but there's also werewolves and vampires and fae and, you know, all those different typical fantasy characters that you would see, but kind of with a Greek mythology kind of twist. I didn't feel like the plot was very original. I felt like it relied a little too heavily on the Greek mythology aspects of it, and like I said, overall just kind of okay. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't anything great. And by the time you got to the 4th book to finish it out, I mean, they just like had sex whenever they felt like having sex. I'm like, there is no reason that sex is happening right now. And I don't mind spice in a book, but it has to make sense. So that's really all I'm going to say about this. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend this series. I mean, if you don't have anything else to read, it's fine. They're really quick books. This last book was way longer than it needed to be, but they're just nothing special. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't know that I would recommend them unless you just don't have anything else to read and you need something that's on Kindle Unlimited to kind of just fill your time for a little bit. But that's all I'm going to say about that one, and we're going to move on to the next book I read this month. And that one was Rebel Witch by Kristen Ciccarelli, and it was fantastic. So that made up for the of Queen of Serpents and Shadows. So I'm glad I followed up a mediocre book with one that was really, really good. I gave it 4.5 stars. It was the second in the duology of The Crimson Moth. The first book was Heartless Hunter, which I read last month, and Rebel Witch is the second book in the series, and it is a duology, so this is the last book, at least currently, that is planned in the series. And I just thought overall it was great. It is a YA romantasy, but it has a definite plot line. The characters are really strong. The dialogue in the book was really good, which I always appreciate it when the dialogue flows nicely from character to character. So in this book, we continue to follow Rune, who is a witch, and Gideon, who is a witch hunter. And it starts off like a little time has passed. From the last book ended kind of on a cliffhanger, and Rune basically had to make a run for it with a bunch of other witches, one of who was a previous evil witch queen. And Gideon is left feeling betrayed, and he is now once again on the hunt to capture Rune to stand trial for being a witch. Rune has kind of gotten herself in like a trap situation with this evil witch queen that she can't really easily escape from, but she realizes that she just wants to go home, save what witches she can, and then find a place to live a quiet, normal life like she's never had before. Rune and Gideon end up striking a bargain where they're gonna kind of help each other for a little bit of time to get Rune back home so that, she can go her separate way to kind of save these witches, and then he can go his separate way to try and continue his hunt for Carissa, who is the evil witch queen, who is trying to make a play to come back into power. Now, it's still you'll find that it's still kind of got that enemies to lovers feel at the beginning, but, Gideon and Rune were meant to be together. I really enjoyed seeing their romance blossom and them coming to terms with their love for each other as the book went on. Without giving away too much of the plot, I will say the book needed to be either a little shorter or it needed to be a little longer. I felt like it could have been longer if they were going to go in and explore what I felt could have been a good addition to the plot. Like we all know from the previous book that Carissa was an evil witch queen and that she had two sisters. Well, in this book, we find that she's trying to bring these sisters back, but we don't really get a good background on Carissa and why she feels like she needs to bring her sisters back, or why she wants to bring her sisters back, or what bringing her sisters back will accomplish. So I felt like that was something that could have been explored a little bit better. Would have added a lot, in my opinion, to the storyline. I thought some of the fluff of traveling from place to place could have been cut out, and that we could have just, like I said, maybe focused more in on that kind of villain story. I think it would have added like another layer just to the overall plot of the book. But overall, love the series, would highly recommend, and it's definitely worth the read. Then next we have Fall of the Neverdark by Philip Quintrell. This is the fourth book in the Echo Saga. And the whole Echo Saga, it's 9 books, and it can all be found on Kindle Unlimited. It's been a great epic fantasy series so far. So if you are someone who loves epic fantasies, I would highly recommend this series to you. And it's nice that it's all on Kindle Unlimited, so you can progress along one book after the other, which is nice because there is a whole lot of characters and different points of view in this series, and the world is pretty detailed and it's very expansive as well. You travel around a whole lot throughout the series, so it's nice to not have to take a big break in between the books, because there's just no way that it's going to stay fresh in your mind with the amount of characters there are in it if you have a big break in between the books. So I would say that I suggest reading them somewhat close together. Now they are set up like the first 3 books were basically a trilogy, and then we moved to the 4th book, and that one still follows the same world and the story from the first 3 books, but it's set like 25 years in the future. I could be wrong about the 25 years portion. It could have been longer than that. Let's just go with we pick up in the future. How about that? So the war has ended. The Dragoon, led by Gideon, who are the dragon riders, have become more prevalent again, and they're working to keep the peace throughout the land. But as we know, peace never lasts, especially not in an epic fantasy book. And they're starting to see stirrings of a group called the Black Hand, who you'll learn about in the first 3 books, kind of making their presence known more. They are seeing orcs who haven't been seen for thousands of years, and everyone thought they were completely wiped out. We're seeing them return to the world, and with them bringing another dark threat kind of looming on the horizon. Now, there is a character that makes a comeback in this book who we thought was dead from the previous 3 books. I won't say who it is, that way it doesn't spoil it for you. But in this, we don't really hear much about that character that's been brought back from the dead in this book. They play a role in it, but it's not anything that's explored in great detail in this book. This 4th book was basically just setting up what I think is going to be the storyline for at least the next 2 books. So the 5th and the 6th book is just exploring the Black Hand and the orcs and how they're bringing war and darkness back into the world. And then continuing on with some of our favorite characters from the previous 3 books, like Gideon, and then introducing us to some new characters as well, like Elijah Galfrey, so we can get to know them and get to know this new threat that's coming into the world. Now, that being said, this whole book wasn't just like a setup. There is a lot of action and movement that takes place in the Fall of the Neverdark, but I felt like I saw a similar pattern with the first 3 books. The first book in the series, Rise of the Ranger, sets you up for the next 2 books as far as getting to know the enemy, getting to know the characters, getting to know the world, and then the epic quest starting. We started on the path for that epic quest, but the first book was definitely more the setup book. I felt that way about this 4th book. Yes, some of the characters are the same and we know the world, but we're having a new threat introduced. And since it is 25, 30, whatever years in the future, we have more characters and more storylines that we need to become invested in. So looking forward to the 5th book. I'm not sure if it'll be like the first 3 where 4, 5, and 6 will all be kind of their own trilogy. And then, you know, we're getting an additional or a continuation or a growth of this storyline in the 7th, 8th, and 9th book, or if the storyline that's going to take place in the 4th book will be continued all the way through the 9th book. So I haven't looked into it that far to know, but I just have really been enjoying this. I think there's not as many epic fantasy books as there once was. I feel like people have taken a step back from some of that complexity that goes along with an epic fantasy for, I don't want to say like a more simple storyline, but in a way they are. Like the worlds are simpler when it's more of either, you know, a standalone, a duology, or a trilogy. I don't feel like you have the time to make the world and the characters as epic as you can in an epic fantasy. So I just don't feel like you hear as much about epic fantasies currently, and they can be harder to find. But this is one I would highly suggest. All 4 that I've read so far have been outstanding. This one, 4 stars, because like I said, is more of a, like, what I call a setup book. So it was great, but it wasn't excellent yet. And so I'm really hoping the 5th book is going to be an excellent one for me. Then my last book for the month was Dragonfall. And it is by L.R. Lamb, and this book is really good. I gave it 3 3/4 stars to 4 stars. I'm kind of still wavering back and forth on that part. And this one is, I believe, a duology. I know the 2nd book is out in the series already, and I believe that is the last planned one, but I am not 100% sure about that. And if you love dragons and you love magic, then you will like this book. So our 2 main characters in this book are Everin, who is a dragon, and Arcady, who is a thief. And dragons have been banished to beyond the veil by humans for centuries now, and they've just been up there biding their time until they can make it back down into the human world, and basically take their world back, take revenge on the humans who they believe have stolen their magic and their home. So through a spell, Arcady ends up ripping a hole in the veil and pulling Everin down into his world, and Everin becomes stuck here, and they also start to become bonded, which hasn't happened between a human and a dragon since the dragons were banished to the other side of the veil. So based on that, you may not think that this is much different from other fantasy books, but it actually, the world building in this book is really great, and it's also a book that's written to be very inclusive. In the particular city that Arcadia lives in, gender is, I guess, fluid is what I'll say. So they don't look at it that whether you're male or female determines that you're male or female. You basically, on how you feel, choose your pronouns. There's a certain sign language that is used when you greet people so that you can sign that you identify as feminine or masculine, or one that if you identify as all, as in your gender being kind of fluid. So I thought that was really unique. Now, the one thing I'll say about that, and this, do not take this as a bash against inclusiveness, because it's not, but the sentence structure based on the way that the pronouns were used was kind of like just hard to read. I had to read slower at first to kind of stay on track with who was being talked about in the conversation. I think because we don't necessarily see pronoun usage in this way, or at least the way it was used in this book, in a lot of the things that we read, just like it was just hard to keep up with. But once I got used to the sentence structure, then it wasn't an issue at all. So I want you to be aware of that. The way you don't, if you do pick this book up, that way you don't get frustrated with it and give up on it, because you don't want to give up on it. It's a really good book, but it can be just a little hard to read at first, and you might have to read a little slower than you normally do. So to go along with that kind of more fluid outlook on gender, and I'm not going to say too much about it because I don't want to give too much away, but the romance in this book is a little, what I'd say is a non-typical romance relationship, which if you read it, you'll find out more of what I mean there. But I thought that was something that was really nice and unique about this book. The character work was amazing. A lot of the characters in this book are very morally gray. Arcady is a thief. There is some grayness to some of the things that he does, and a lot of the people that he interacts with does throughout the book. But if you're looking for great world building, those really unique, morally gray characters in an inclusive setting, I would say give this book a try. I plan on picking up the second book in the series, which is called Emberclaw. This book leaves you on kind of an emotional cliffhanger. So you're definitely going to want to read the second book in the series. I think pretty close to finishing this one. So nice that it's already out and you can see how the story ends. So I hope you enjoyed hearing all the different books that I read this month, and maybe it gives you some ideas of some books or series that you can pick up as well. If you read any books that were fantastic this month, leave them down below in the comments so we can all get some ideas of some other books that we can pick up for ourselves. So take care, keep reading, and I'll catch you in my next video. Bye.